Physical therapist stopped me in the parking lot after my Tuesday session, just as I was fumbling with my keys. "Iris," she said, and something in her voice made me stop. "I don't want to overstep, but do you know who's been coming to your house on Thursday mornings?" I laughed. I actually laughed. "My son," I said. "He checks on me." She nodded slowly, the way people do when they're choosing their words. "I drive past your street on my way in. I've seen a different car there too. A silver SUV, always Thursday, always gone by noon." She paused. "I just thought you should know." I thanked her, got in my car, and sat there for a long moment before I started the engine. I'm 71 years old. I live alone in the house my late husband Roger and I bought in 1987, a 2-story colonial on a quiet street in Dayton, Ohio. Roger passed 6 years ago. Heart attack, quick, no warning, and since then it's been me and the cat and whatever I can find to watch on television after dinner. My son Mitchell lives about 20 minutes away with his wife and their 2 kids. He's a good son. He calls. He comes by. He worries about me in the way adult children worry about their mothers. A little too much and not quite enough at the same time. I had given Mitchell a key 2 years ago, after I slipped on the back porch in January and spent 4 hours on the cold boards before my neighbour heard me calling, just for emergencies, I told him, so someone could get in if something happened to me. I hadn't thought much about that key since. Driving home that afternoon, I told myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe Mitchell had started coming on Thursdays in addition to Sundays and just hadn't mentioned it. Maybe it was his wife dropping something off. Maybe it was nothing at all, and Lena had simply seen a silver car that happened to park on my street. But that evening, I walked through my living room and stopped. The small ceramic dish on my entryway table, the one where I keep my spare change and a backup set of glasses, was turned the wrong way. The little painted bluebird was facing the wall. I always keep it facing out. Roger gave it to me for our anniversary, and I have kept it facing out for 30 years. I stood there and stared at it for a long time. I told myself I must have bumped it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that living alone does things to your mind, makes you notice small things and build them into stories. My doctor had said as much gently at my last checkup. Isolation can affect perception, he'd said, which I'd found insulting at the time and found myself repeating now. But I kept thinking about the bluebird. I thought about the week before when I couldn't find my reading glasses and found them eventually in the kitchen drawer where I keep rubber bands and take-out menus. I'd assumed I'd set them down without thinking. I thought about the Wednesday, or was it Thursday, 2 weeks ago when I came home from my garden club and the back door was unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. I am always certain about the back door because Roger drilled that into me for 40 years. But I told myself I must have forgotten. I sat down at my kitchen table and tried to think clearly. Someone was coming into my house. Someone had a key or knew where I kept the spare under the ceramic frog by the back steps. Someone was moving things just slightly, just enough that I would doubt myself rather than doubt them. That thought, that last thought, made my stomach drop because I recognized it. My older sister went through something similar with her neighbour years ago. A slow erosion of confidence, small things going missing or being moved until she genuinely couldn't trust her own memory. It had a name. Lena had even used the word once carefully when she'd said, "I don't want to alarm you before telling me about the silver car." I was being gaslit, in my own home, by someone with a key. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed and went through the list of people who had access. Mitchell had the key. His wife Tricia knew where I kept the spare. Beyond that, no one. I'd never given a copy to anyone else. I was certain of that. I did not want to believe it was Mitchell. I couldn't make myself believe it was Tricia either. She wasn't warm exactly, but she'd always been decent to me. She remembered my birthday. She let me take the grandkids to the park on Saturdays. But someone was coming in on Thursdays, and I was gone every Thursday morning, Water aerobics at the YMCA 9 to 11, same as it had been for 3 years. The next morning I called my bank. I asked them to walk me through the last 60 days of transactions on my checking account, and I listened carefully, writing everything down on the notepad I keep by the phone. Most of it was familiar, but there were 4 ATM withdrawals I didn't remember making. $200 each, spread out over 2 months, always on a Thursday or the day after. $800. I hung up the phone and sat very still. $800 wasn't a fortune, but it was money I hadn't taken out, and it was a pattern, and patterns don't lie the way memory can. I had the statements, I had the dates, I had Lena's words in my head, I had the bluebird facing the wrong way. I didn't call Mitchell. I knew that if I called him and he was the one doing this, he would have time to prepare, and if he wasn't, I'd only frighten him and feel foolish. I needed to know first. I needed to know first. My grandson uses a word now. Receipts. You need receipts, Grandma. Actual evidence. I'd always found it funny before. I drove to Best Buy that Friday. I'm not someone who's afraid of technology, though I'm not expert either. I asked one of the young men in the blue shirts to show me the simplest indoor security camera they had. Something that recorded to my phone. Something I could check from anywhere. Something small enough to be unobtrusive. He showed me 3 options. I bought the middle one, $69. It came with a little magnetic base and could sit almost anywhere. At home, I followed the instructions, which were clearer than I expected, and set the camera up on my living room bookshelf, behind a row of Roger's old Louis L'Amour novels. From there, it had a clear view of the entryway, the staircase, and part of the kitchen. I could see my front door. I could see the bluebird dish. The app on my phone would send me a notification whenever it detected motion. I felt strange doing it, sneaky almost. This was my son I was potentially surveilling. My son, who had driven me to my colonoscopy and waited for 3 hours in a plastic chair. My son, who cried at Roger's funeral when he thought no one was looking. Setting a camera felt like a betrayal, and yet someone was walking into my home, moving my things, taking my money. Whatever this turned out to be, I needed to know the truth. The following Thursday I went to water aerobics as usual. I wore my normal clothes. I chatted with the women in my lane about the tulips coming up, and whether the new instructor was too young to understand older joints. I drove home the same way I always drove home, stopping at the Kroger on 5th for a carton of eggs and a head of lettuce. My phone buzzed in my purse while I was in the produce section. Motion detected. I stood between the lettuce and the cucumbers and opened the app with shaking hands. The camera had recorded a short clip. I pressed play. The front door opened. Mitchell walked in. Behind him was a woman I didn't recognize at first. She had dark hair and was wearing a grey coat. She was carrying something, a small zippered bag, the kind you use for toiletries. They walked into my living room together, and Mitchell pointed toward the hallway, toward my bedroom, and she went that way while he walked toward my kitchen. I stood there in the Kroger with my hand over my mouth. I watched the rest of the clip. The woman came out of my bedroom carrying the toiletry bag, which was now clearly heavier than it had been going in. Mitchell came out of the kitchen and they spoke to each other. I couldn't hear. The camera didn't have great audio from that distance, and then they left. The whole thing took 14 minutes. I put the eggs back. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could go inside. I didn't confront them that day. I know that surprises people when I tell the story. Everyone says they would have called immediately, would have driven straight to Mitchell's office, would have demanded answers on the spot. But I am 71 years old, and I have learned that the moment you show your hand is the moment you lose your advantage. I wanted to understand the full picture first. I wanted more than one clip. I wanted them to have no room to maneuver. I called my bank again that afternoon and put a fraud alert on my account. I changed my ATM PIN. I also went to my bedroom and looked carefully at what was there. My jewelry box had been opened. I could tell because the small velvet tray that holds my pearl earrings, Roger's gift when Mitchell was born, was at an angle. The pearls were there, but a gold bangle I'd inherited from my mother, and a small diamond pendant I'd bought myself the year Roger died were gone. I sat on the edge of my bed and I cried, not for long, but I cried. Then I wrote everything down. Dates, amounts, what was missing, what had been moved. I took photographs of the open jewelry box. I screenshotted the bank app. I saved the camera footage to a folder on my phone and emailed it to myself so I'd have a copy. I recorded the next 2 Thursdays as well. On the second Thursday, Mitchell came alone. He went straight to my bedroom. He was in there for 8 minutes. When he came out, he went to my kitchen, opened the drawer where I keep my checkbook, took out the checkbook, sat down at my kitchen table and wrote a check. Then he tore it out and put it in his shirt pocket. Then he put the checkbook back and left. I watched that clip 4 times. He had added himself to my account as a secondary holder 2 years ago when Roger died, just in case something happened. I had agreed. It had seemed like the responsible thing to do. He had been writing checks to himself, or to someone. The account holder record showed 2 checks I hadn't written, the $600 each in the past 6 weeks. $1,200 on top of the ATM withdrawals, on top of the jewelry. I had a friend, a woman I'd known since our kids were in elementary school together, whose husband was a retired detective. I called her that evening and told her I needed advice. She put him on the phone. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, and when I finished he said, "You've got enough. You need to go to the police, and you need to call an elder law attorney tomorrow morning." I wrote down both things on my notepad. The next morning I called an elder law attorney, a woman named O'Brien whose name I found through the Ohio State Bar Association's referral line. She saw me 2 days later. I brought my notepad, my phone with the footage, the printed bank statements I'd requested at my branch, and photographs of the empty spots in my jewelry box. She was thorough and she was kind, and she was also clearly angry on my behalf in the focused, professional way that good attorneys get angry. She told me what my rights were. She told me that what Mitchell had done constituted elder financial abuse under Ohio law and that it was a felony. She told me that the camera footage, the bank records, and the check images would together constitute strong evidence. She also told me that many families choose to handle these situations privately and asked whether that was what I wanted. I thought about it for a long moment. I thought about the bluebird facing the wrong way. I thought about my mother's gold bangle. I thought about Mitchell sitting at my kitchen table writing a check from my checkbook in my house with a key I gave him so he could help me in an emergency. "No," I said, "I want to do this the right way." We went to the Dayton Police Department together the following week. I filed a report. I had everything organized. The detective who reviewed my materials told me it was one of the better documented cases he'd seen come in. The camera footage was clear. The check images were clear. The jewelry appraisals I'd had done years ago gave dollar values for what was missing. Mitchell was arrested on a Thursday morning, which felt appropriate somehow. He called me from the police station. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message later. He was crying, saying he was sorry, saying he'd been in financial trouble, saying he didn't think I'd notice, saying he was going to pay it all back. I didn't call back. His case went to the county prosecutor's office. Because he was a first-time offender and because he had written checks rather than accessing accounts electronically, his attorney negotiated a plea. He pled guilty to 1 count of theft from an elderly person. He received 18 months probation, was required to complete a financial counseling program, and was ordered to pay full restitution, the bank withdrawals, the check amounts, and the appraised value of the jewelry. The woman in the grey coat was his co-worker. She had come the first Thursday to help him assess what was in the house. What might be worth taking. She wasn't charged because the prosecutor determined there wasn't sufficient evidence she'd personally taken anything. That bothered me. It still bothers me. Tricia, my daughter-in-law, Filed for divorce 3 months after the arrest. She came to see me once by herself, and we sat in my kitchen and she cried for a long time. I didn't have much to say. I made her a cup of tea. She took the kids and moved back to her family in Cincinnati. I see my grandchildren when their schedules allow. Their mother has been fair about that. We talk on the phone, and they came for Thanksgiving. And my granddaughter, she's 12 now, has started texting me memes that I mostly don't understand, but always appreciate. She thinks it's very funny that I have a security camera. She asked me to show her the app, and I did. And she said, "Grandma, you low-key did that yourself," and I chose to take it as a compliment. The camera is still on the bookshelf. I leave it there, not out of fear exactly, but out of something harder to name. A reminder, maybe, or a kind of testimony. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. They assume it was the moment I saw the footage, or the arrest, or the court date. But the hardest part was standing in my own living room, looking at a ceramic bluebird facing the wrong way, and deciding to trust what I saw, instead of doubting what I knew. I am 71 years old. I live alone. I loved my son. And I knew my own house. I knew the way I kept things. I knew what was mine. That knowledge, ordinary, domestic, unspectacular, was the only thing that saved me. I held on to it when everything else was being quietly taken away, and I held on long enough to do something about it. Roger always said I was stubborn. He meant it affectionately most of the time. I think he would have been proud. I still think about that ceramic bluebird. Something so small, a little painted dish, turned the wrong way, and yet it was the thing that cracked everything open. Not the bank statements, not the camera footage. That bluebird facing the wall instead of the room was the moment I had to decide whether to trust myself or talk myself out of what I already knew. That's the part nobody warns you about. It's not the betrayal itself that does the most damage. It's the long stretch before you have proof, when you're standing in your own living room second-guessing your own mind. Mitchell didn't just take money and jewelry. He took something quieter, my confidence in my own perception. And I think that was deliberate, even if he never said so. Keep her doubting herself long enough, and she'll never look too closely. That's how it works. That's what made it cruel. But here's what I've come to understand about what happened. When I sit with it honestly, the outcome was never really in his hands. It was in mine. Every choice he made, using that key, bringing someone into my home, writing checks from my account, carried its own weight, and that weight landed eventually. It always does. Not because the universe is watching and keeping score, but because the truth of what people do tends to surface. Paper trails exist. Neighbors notice. Cameras cost $69 at Best Buy. The things we do in secret leave marks, and marks get found. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the decision to act on what I knew, rather than on what was comfortable. That took something I hadn't thought of as courage before. More like stubbornness, like Roger always said. But I think stubbornness, when it's pointed in the right direction, is just another word for integrity. I could have told myself it was nothing. I could have waited for a more convenient truth. I didn't, and I believe, in some plain and unglamorous way, that the discipline of following through, making the call, driving to the attorney's office, sitting across from a detective and saying out loud what my son had done, was exactly what I owed myself. There's something else I want to say, and it's the thing I find hardest to put into words. When I watched that footage, Mitchell walking into my house, pointing the woman toward my bedroom, sitting at my kitchen table with my checkbook, I had to hold two things at once. The grief of it and the clarity of it. I loved my son. I still love him, in the complicated way you love someone whose choices have permanently changed what's possible between you. But love is not the same as permission. Loving someone does not require you to absorb what they take from you and call it family. I am 71. I live alone. I keep a camera behind Roger's old paperbacks, and I know, more certainly than I know almost anything else, that the willingness to see clearly, even when what you're seeing breaks your heart, is not a failure of love. It's the most honest form of it. The bluebird is still on the entryway table, still facing out,